Okay, think about this. What if every single bit of health information ever recorded could actually help speed up the discovery of new medicines?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about, well, just a massive amount of patient data.
An absolute mountain. Yeah.
And today, we're going to dive into how all this information, especially from digital health records, might just completely reshape how we develop new drugs.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've looked at some really fascinating sources, things covering AI and drug discovery, practical case studies,
Right.
how clinical trials are changing, pharmacokinetics. It's a broad picture.
A real mix. So our mission today is pretty clear, right? We want to understand how analyzing all this patient data, these digital records, is actually changing the game for drug discovery and creation.
And touch on the important stuff too, like data privacy. That's key.
Absolutely. Okay, so where do we start? The sheer amount of data.
Let's start there. The rise of digital health records means there's just an unprecedented volume of information available now. And importantly, this isn't just the structured data you get from, say, a tightly controlled clinical trial.
Right. It's messier, more real world.
Exactly. It's a much wider lens on what actually happens to patients day to day.
Think about what's in those records. Diagnoses, treatments given, lab results, maybe even lifestyle notes sometimes. It paints a far more detailed picture.
A much richer picture than just the snapshots we get from trials. It shows disease progression, treatment responses in, normal life.
And with this flood of data comes,
Ah,
well, huge analytical potential, doesn't it?
definitely. Using AI, machine learning, these tools can sift through these enormous data sets and spot patterns, connections that, frankly, we probably would have missed before.
Okay, so how does that help find new drugs?
Well, one major way is identifying completely new drug targets,
Yeah.
things we didn't even know were involved.
So instead of just focusing on known pathways, these algorithms look across everything.
Pretty much. They can scan millions of data points, genetic data, clinical data, you name it, and flag molecules or interactions that seem really important in a particular disease, but were maybe overlooked.
Wow. Finding a hidden player in a disease just from the data patterns, that's
It's huge. It really is. And we have specific computational tools for this, like ligand-based and structure-based in silico screening.
in silico meaning computer simulation.
Exactly. Ligand-based looks at drugs we already know work and tries to find similar new molecules. Structure-based uses the 3D shape of the target protein to see what might fit, like a virtual key in a lock.
Okay.
And you have resources like the KAG database, think of it as a massive map of biological pathways.
Right.
And tools like ToxDB Scan, which help predict potential toxicity problems really early on, saves a lot of time and resources down the line.
Book a high-tech screening process before you even get to the lab bench properly.
Precisely. But this data isn't just finding targets, it's also changing how we actually design the clinical trials to test these potential drugs.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, by analyzing historical patient data, researchers get a much better handle on how a disease naturally progresses in different types of people.
So they can design trials better.
Yes, design trials with more specific inclusion criteria, maybe smaller trials, faster trials, that are more likely to give a clear yes or no on whether the drug works.
And those early trials are critical, like the phase 2 randomized control trials you mentioned in the prep, getting that first reliable signal of efficacy.
Exactly. And then you have things like the dose-ranging phase I trials, using data to help pinpoint the right dose to take into the big, expensive phase 3 trials.
Makes sense. Trying to optimize before the massive investment.
And data helps with how patients are allocated too. Randomization is the gold standard, obviously, especially in big trials, to avoid bias.
Sure.
But in smaller trials, sometimes techniques like minimization are used. It uses the data to help ensure the groups are balanced from the start on key factors, age, disease severity, things like that.
So the comparison between the drug group and the placebo or control group is as fair as possible.
That's the goal, making sure any difference you see is more likely due to the drug, not just baseline differences in the patients.
Okay, so the data shapes the trials. But what about after a drug is approved? Does the data story end there?
Oh, not at all. This is where real-world data becomes incredibly valuable for understanding pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics.
Right, PKPD, what the body does to the drug and what the drug does to the body.
Exactly. Clinical trials are controlled environments. Real-world data shows us how drugs are actually absorbed, distributed, metabolized, excreted, ADME across a much wider, more diverse population.
People with other conditions, other medications, different genetics.
All of that. Things you can't always capture perfectly in a trial setting.
And seeing how it works in the wild, so to speak. That must be crucial for personalized medicine, right?
Absolutely key. Understanding that variability in ADME across different people is fundamental if we want to tailor treatments effectively.
So predicting how this specific patient might respond based on their data.
That's the direction. And it gets even more complex. We're now using data to investigate things like the gut microbiome's role.
Our gut bacteria, how do they fit in?
Well, those trillions of microbes can actually metabolize drugs themselves, changing how they work or how toxic they might be. It's another layer of complexity that real-world data can help us unravel.
Fascinating. It's like a whole hidden ecosystem influencing the drug.
It really is.
Okay, this is all very powerful conceptually, but maybe we can make it more concrete for our listener.
Hmm.
Can we look at some real-world examples, perhaps from the process development side you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. Looking at sources from Organic Process Research and Development, or OPR&D, gives great practical examples.
Okay.
So when chemists are figuring out the best way to actually make a drug molecule in large quantities, they run tons of small experiments, screening experiments.
Trying different conditions.
Exactly. Temperature, catalysts, solvents. And they analyze all that data yield, purity to find the optimal conditions. Like for a specific reaction, say a palladium-catalyzed cross-coupling, analyzing the data tells them the best recipe.
So data isn't just for finding the drug, but for finding the best way to manufacture it reliably and efficiently.
Precisely. It's crucial for scale-up. Another example is impurity analysis. They use techniques like HPLC, that's high-performance liquid chromatography,
Right, a standard analytical tool.
to meticulously track and measure any tiny impurities that might form during the manufacturing process, especially as they make larger batches. The data ensures the final drug meets really strict quality standards.
Quality control, basically, driven by data.
Yes, and we also see computational examples like molecular docking simulation.
Out of the computers.
Yeah. By simulating how a drug molecule might bind to its target protein, researchers use that data to understand why it works the structure-activity relationship. This helps them tweak the molecule to make it even better, like when developing inhibitors for a specific enzyme.
It sounds like data analysis is embedded in almost every step now.
It increasingly is, from initial discovery through development, manufacturing, and even post-market surveillance.
Okay, now, we have to address the elephant in the room, privacy. We're talking about huge amounts of sensitive patient health information.
Absolutely critical. The privacy concerns are significant, and rightly so. Collecting, storing, and analyzing this data has to be done ethically and securely.
There are regulations, of course. Things like GDPR, HIPAA. The specifics vary, but the principle of protecting patient confidentiality is paramount.
And regulatory bodies like the FDA in the U.S. play a huge role. They regulate the drugs and biologics themselves, requiring things like investigational new drug applications, INDs, before human testing can even start.
Right.
And for medical devices that might collect or use this data, there's the quality system regulation, QSR, ensuring they're safe and effective. It's a complex landscape.
So balancing the immense potential of this data with the fundamental right to privacy, that's the tightrope we're walking.
It is. And the goal ultimately is to use this data to benefit patients.
Right.
Which brings us back to clinical applications and personalized medicine.
Right. The idea is that by analyzing an individual's data, maybe their genetics, their specific disease subtype, how they've responded before we can tailor treatments just for them.
Exactly. Moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach towards treatments optimized for the individual. That's the promise here.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways?
Yeah, well, I think it's clear that big data and digital health records are really powerful forces reshaping drug development.
Yeah.
They're helping us find new targets, design smarter trials, understand how drugs work in the real world. It's impacting almost everything.
But always with that crucial need for ethical considerations and robust privacy protection.
Always. That has to underpin everything.
So it really feels like we're moving towards a future where medicine is more effective, potentially safer, and definitely more personalized, driven by this intelligent analysis of data.
I think so. Which leads to maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder.
Okay.
As our ability to gather and analyze ever more patient data grows, and it's growing exponentially, how is this going to fundamentally change how we even understand disease? Not just treat it, but understand its roots.
A deeper biological insight driven by data.
Potentially. And as we push further into truly personalized medicine, What are the most critical safeguards we need to put in place to make sure this innovation happens responsibly and ethically?
Really important questions.
Yeah.
Definitely something to think about long after this conversation ends.
Indeed.
Well, thanks for exploring this complex and vital topic with us today.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating area.